I had promised myself, rowing that last mile in the dark, that I would only look. 12 years is long enough to learn that looking costs nothing and hoping costs everything, and I had nothing left to spend on hope. So I meant to beach the skiff below the point, climb the black rocks under cover of a sailor's borrowed coat, and see with my own eyes whether Brackenreach still stood before I decided whether I had a right to walk back into it. Then I came around the headland and saw the north lamp burning. It should not have been burning. Ossian Vale had declared me drowned in the second winter after I sailed, drowned honorably, fighting the raiders who had been bleeding our coast for a generation, my ship broken on a reef 300 miles south with all hands lost but me, though no one on this coast knew that last part. He had worn my father's circlet within the year. A regent's grief, he called it, though I have never met a grieving man who moved so quickly into another man's chair. The lamp on the north tower was lit only for a living king. Every hold on this coast knew the custom, had known it since before my grandfather's grandfather set the first flame in that glass. Vale should have snuffed it the day he put on the circlet, and by every account I'd gathered limping up through smugglers' ports and fishing towns under other men's names, he had. And yet there it was, small and gold and stubborn against the dark, exactly where it had always been. I told myself it meant nothing, a keeper too lazy to change the ritual, a superstition somebody hadn't the heart to break. I told myself a great many sensible things as I climbed the rocks, and none of them explained why my chest had gone tight in a way it had not gone tight in 12 years. Not once, not through the wreck, not through the years of rough work and rougher silence that followed it. It felt like the pull of an undertow, the sea drawing back before a wave, some old current in my own blood remembering a shore it hadn't touched in a long time. I had felt that pull only once before, the night before I sailed, standing on this same stretch of dark with a girl half my rank and twice my composure, and I had told myself that was nothing too. I had been 18. I had believed, the way the young believe everything, that there would be time later to find out what it meant. 12 years is a great deal of later. I should say something here about the wreck, because it shaped every year that came after it, and because I have never told the whole of it to anyone, not even the men who fished me half drowned out of the wreckage. We had gone south to break the raiders who had been working our coast for 3 summers running, burning fishing villages and taking what they pleased a just war, or as just as war is ever permitted to be. We broke them. I want that understood. Whatever else I lost that year, we broke them, and the coast has not seen a raider's sail since. But the sea does not care what a battle was fought for, and a storm took what the raiders' arrows had not, and I went into black water off a reef with half my crew and did not expect to come out of it. I did come out of it. A fishing boat from a port I had never heard of pulled me out more dead than living, 3 days after the wreck, so far south and so changed by exposure and salt that even I did not recognize my own face in the water barrel they used for a mirror. By the time I had strength to speak clearly, word had already run up the coast that Brackenreach's king had drowned with all hands. I could have corrected it. I told myself in those first weeks that I would, as soon as I was strong enough to make the journey home and stand in front of my own hold as the man who had led half of it to death in the south. That is the truth of it, since I am telling truths tonight. I did not stay away because the sea kept me from Brackenreach. I stayed away because I did not know how to walk back into my own hall and tell the mothers and wives of the men who had not come home that their king had lived when their sons had not. Every week I delayed made the return harder. Every month made the lie truer than the fact. By the time the second winter came and went and word reached me, 3 ports up the coast, that Ossian Vale had taken the circlet as regent for a king who would not be coming back, I had already spent a year telling myself I was not fit to wear it. I will not make this an easy story about a good man kept from home by circumstance. I stayed away by choice, dressed up as duty for longer than I care to admit. I worked the southern ports under other names, a shipwright's hand, a net mender, once a full season breaking horses for a lord who never learned I'd once worn a crown of my own. I told myself I was earning the right to come home, though I could not have said what that right would look like or how I would know when I'd earned enough of it. I grew a beard I would never have been permitted to wear as king. I let my hands go rough and my speech go plain. I became, quite thoroughly, someone else, and there were years, I say this with the shame it deserves, when becoming someone else felt like relief rather than exile. What brought me back in the end was not courage. It was a trader out of Brackenreach itself, met by chance in a tavern 11 months ago, who spoke of the hold the way a man speaks of a house gone to rot under a landlord who does not love it. The fishing quota's veil had raised past what the boats could bear. The smuggling he turned a blind eye to when it lined his own stores. The old families pushed from their holdings to make room for men loyal to him rather than to Brackenreach. I sat in that tavern and listened to a stranger describe my own hold dying by inches under a man I had, in effect, handed it to through my own cowardice, and something in me that had gone quiet for a decade woke up angry. It took 11 months to make my way north, working passage where I could, because I had no coin worth the name and did not care to explain to anyone why a shipwright's hand was in such a hurry to reach a hold he claimed no tie to. 11 months of nights convincing myself I was going home to set right a wrong I had let stand too long, and other nights, worse nights, convincing myself I had no right to go home at all, that a man who let his own hold believe him dead for 12 years while it suffered had forfeited whatever claim blood gave him. I had not resolved that argument with myself by the time I came around the headland and saw the north lamp burning. I have still not entirely resolved it. But the lamp changed the shape of the question, because a lamp that should have gone dark 12 years ago and had not meant someone in Brackenreach had been keeping a truth alive that the rest of the hold had been told to bury, and I found I could not row past that and only look. The tower door was unbarred. I knocked anyway, because a stranger who walks into a lit tower unannounced gets a poker to the skull on this coast, and I had not survived 12 years of other men's wars to die of bad manners on my own doorstep. "It's open," a voice called down unhurried, "but mind the third step, it's rotted." I minded the third step. I climbed into lamplight and smoke and the smell of fish oil, and found a woman standing at the great lens with a rag in her hand, polishing 12 years of salt spray off glass that did not need to be that clean for a lamp that, by rights, no longer had a king to burn for. She did not startle at the sight of a stranger in a wrecked man's coat. She looked at me the way a woman looks at weather, assessing, unbothered, already deciding what to do about it. "You've the look of a man the sea spat back," she said. "There's a fire below if you want to dry out before you tell me whether I should be afraid of you." "You should always be a little afraid of strangers," I said. "It keeps a person honest." "I've been keeping this lamp honest for 12 years with nobody's help," she said. "I expect I can manage a stranger." I did not know her. I want to be plain about that because it would be a prettier story if I had climbed those stairs and known her at once, the way the old tales promise. I did not. 12 years and a life spent making myself into someone else had scraped a great deal off me, names and faces among them. What I knew was the pull in my chest, tightening the longer I stood in that light, like a rope drawn slowly taut. "Why keep a lamp burning for a dead king?" I asked her, because it was the only question that mattered, and I am not a patient man, whatever my manners suggest. Something crossed her face, not grief exactly, older and more worn than grief, the way a stone in a river is worn rather than broken. "Because nobody proved it to me," she said. "They found his ship's figurehead washed up 2 winters after and a length of sailcloth, and Lord Vale stood on the point and told the whole hold to grieve on schedule. But nobody brought me a body. I keep this light for the King of Brackenreach, living, until someone hands me a reason not to. That's the custom. I intend to keep it whether Lord Vale likes the bookkeeping or not." "He can't be pleased," I said. "He is not," she said, and something almost like satisfaction moved through her voice. "He sent men twice to have it put out. I told them the tower answers to the keeper's oath, not the regent's temper, and they can climb up and snuff it themselves if they've a mind to explain to the coast why the new lord fears an old lamp." She set down her rag. "You still haven't told me your name." I gave her the name I had worn through 6 ports and 4 winters, a dead sailor's name I'd taken because dead men don't mind the borrowing. She gave me hers, Elin, keeper of the North Light, daughter and granddaughter of keepers before her, and did not ask why a man who called himself a shipwrecked sailor had hands too clean for rope work, and a way of standing that no fisherman I'd ever met had learned. I noticed that she noticed. I have thought since that Elin noticed a great many things she chose not to say aloud, in those first hours, and that this restraint was its own kind of kindness, giving a stranger room to be a stranger for a night before deciding what else he might be. We sat by her small fire until well past midnight, and the talk that night was the first real talk I had had with another soul in longer than I cared to count. I had spent 12 years speaking to men across taverns and docksides in the careful, guarded way of a man with something to hide, giving nothing away that might be traced back to a name he no longer used. Elin asked no questions that required guarding. She spoke instead, unprompted, of the tower and the hold and her own life inside them, and I found I could listen without lying, which had become, somewhere in those years, a kind of luxury I had forgotten the taste of. She told me about the winter the harbor froze solid to the second mooring post, and she'd carried oil up the tower stairs on her own back, 6 trips in a single night, rather than let the lamp gutter while the ice made the usual delivery impossible. She told me about her grandmother, the keeper before her mother, who had kept the light through a war older than either of us, and about the small rituals of the work, the particular way you trim a wick so the flame doesn't smoke and blind ships trying to read it from the water, the log she kept of every ship that passed and every storm that threatened, the quiet pride of a duty nobody thanked her for and everybody depended on. She told me, too, about the boy she'd once been half promised to before the wreck, before the years. She did not say his name, only that he'd sailed away a boy full of duty and had likely died a man full of it, and that some nights she thought she had spent 12 years keeping a light for a memory rather than a man, and could not decide if that made her faithful or foolish. "Both, maybe," I said when I trusted my voice. "Maybe," she agreed, and did not ask why my eyes had gone wet in the firelight, and I loved her a little for not asking, before I let myself understand that the word loved had entered my thinking at all, unbidden and entirely too soon for a man who had given her a dead sailor's name an hour before. I did not tell her who I was that first night. I want that understood. I was not measuring her, testing her the way old tales like their kings to test their maids before granting them a crown. I was a coward, plainly, for one more night, and then, as it turned out, for several more after that. 12 years had taught me that when a man believes himself unworthy of a thing, he finds every reason to delay reaching for it, and I had a great deal of unworthiness stored up by then, more than a single confession could unpack in one sitting by one fire. I told her before dawn that I had nowhere pressing to be, and asked whether the tower could use an extra pair of hands for a few days, oil to be hauled, the lens to be cleaned properly before the autumn storms, the outer stair to be shored up where the salt had eaten the wood. It was not entirely a lie. The tower did need those things, and I could see, watching her work, that she had been doing a 2-person job alone for longer than was reasonable for any one keeper, however stubborn. She looked at me for a long moment, weighing, I think now, more than my offer of labor, and said only, "The pay is bad and the hours are worse," which I understood correctly to be a yes. I stayed 4 days before anything in the hold changed, and those 4 days are the ones I return to most often in memory, more than the confrontation that followed or the years of the crown that came after it, because they were the last days I had of being nobody in particular, and the first days I had of being, in some manner I could not yet name honestly, myself again. We worked the tower together in the mornings. I learned the trim of the wick, learned to read the weather off the color of the water the way she did, learned that a lighthouse keeper's days are fuller and more exacting than any outsider imagines, full of small, precise duties that cannot be skipped without consequence somewhere out on the water. In the afternoons I walked the shingle, and without telling her why, took the measure of the hold I had left as a boy of 18, and was seeing now as a man past 30. I saw the things the trader in the Southern Tavern had described and worse. Nets confiscated from families who could not meet Vale's quotas. An old smithy shuttered because its owner had refused to pay a loyalty tithe that had no precedent in any custom Brackenreach had ever kept. Children too thin for a coast this rich in fish. I saw Corse, once a dice-losing boy I'd half-liked, now a broad lieutenant in Vale's colors, moving through the market with the particular tired watchfulness of a man enforcing rules he did not entirely believe in. In the evenings, Aline and I sat by her fire and talked, and each night I told her a little more truth than the night before, though never the largest truth, never my name. I told her on the second night that I had once known a hold like Brackenreach and left it under circumstances I was not proud of. She did not push. On the third night, I told her that I had spent a long time believing a man forfeits his home by failing it badly enough, and asked her carefully whether she thought that was true. She considered it the way she considered everything without hurry. I think, she said, a man who believes that too completely never comes home to find out whether it's true, and so he never lets anyone tell him otherwise, which seems to me its own kind of cowardice, dressed up as humility. She looked at me directly then, in a way that made the tower feel smaller than it was. But I don't know your circumstances. I'm only speaking in general. In general, I agreed, and said nothing else that night, because I did not yet trust myself to say the next thing without saying too much. On the fourth night, the pull in my chest, the tide pull, I had begun calling it privately, for want of a better word, had grown from a tightness I could work around to something closer to a constant low ache, as though some part of me had already decided what the rest of me was still arguing about. I found myself watching her hands as she trimmed the wick, the economy of her movements, the small furrow of concentration between her brows, and thinking that I had crossed 300 miles of coast believing I was returning to set right a political wrong, and had somehow, along the way, without noticing the moment it happened, begun returning for her instead, or for her as much as for the hold, the two reasons braided together until I could not entirely separate them. I did not act on any of it that night. I want to be honest about the pace of this, because the old tales like to compress 12 years of longing and 4 days of courtship into a single lightning-struck evening, and that is not how it happened for us. It happened slowly, in trimmed wicks and shared silence, and the particular ease of two people who have run out of reasons to perform for each other. And I would not trade the slowness for a faster telling even now, looking back. It was on the morning of the 5th day that Vale's men came with orders that made plain the game had changed. I had gone down to the shingle before dawn, restless, turning over in my mind the question of when, not whether by then, but when I would tell Aline the truth, when a fisherman I had come to know slightly over those days, a broad, quiet man named Tarek, caught my arm on the path and spoke low and fast. "Words come down from the hall," he said. "Vale's called for the lamp to be dark by week's end, custom or no custom, and he's sending Corse with enough men to see it done if the keeper won't do it herself. There's talk he means to have her removed from the tower entire, put in someone who'll follow orders." He looked at me with the particular assessing look I had noticed more than once over those 4 days. A man who suspected there was more to the shipwrecked sailor helping at the lighthouse than the sailor was saying, and had decided, for reasons of his own, not to press it. "Thought you'd want to know, seeing as you've been up there most of the week." I thanked him and stood a long while on the shingle after he'd gone, watching the gray line where sea met sky, and understood that whatever slow, careful unfolding I had been permitting myself with Alin, the days of trimmed wicks and half-truths, the luxury of being nobody in particular a little longer, had just run out of road. A man cannot watch 6 armed men come to remove the one honest thing left in his hold and still call himself only a shipwrecked sailor with clean hands. I climbed the tower to tell her and found her already at the window, already watching the same gray line, already reading in it something of what Tarek had told me on the path. She did not turn when I came in. "They've never come with 6 before," she said. "6 means they mean to finish it. Either the lamp or the keeper, and I expect Ossian Vale would consider both outcomes acceptable." "I know," I said. "I've just come from the shingle, Tarek told me." "Tarek talks to you more than he talks to most strangers who have been here 5 days, she said, still not turning. "I've noticed that about you generally. People tell you things. You have a way of listening that makes a man forget he's being careful." A pause. "I don't think you're only a shipwrecked sailor. I've thought that since the 3rd night, watching you read the weather like a man who's commanded ships rather than crewed them." "I didn't ask, because I judged you'd tell me when you were ready. And because whatever you were hiding, you were kind, and I've learned to value kindness over explanation." I crossed the small room and stood beside her at the window, close enough that the tide pool in my chest had become, by then, something I could no longer mistake for anything but what it was. "My name," I said, "is not the one I gave you." I gathered. "It's Alaric Corwin," I said, and watched her go very still. "I sailed south 12 years ago to break the raiders on our coast, and the sea took my ship on the way home, and I let the hold believe I'd drowned with it because I did not know how to walk back into my own hall and face the families of men who had not survived what I survived. Ossian Vale is not a usurper in the strict sense. The hold believed me dead, and someone had to hold the circlet, and by every law I know he did nothing unlawful in taking it. But he has made himself a tyrant in the years since, and I let that happen by staying away, and I have spent 11 months making my way back to Brackenreach to try to undo what my own cowardice allowed." She was quiet for a long moment, and I stood with my heart going harder than it had in the whole of the confrontation I could feel building on the shingle below, because I understood in that moment that whatever she said next mattered more to me than whether I reclaimed the circlet at all. 12 years, she said finally. "I have climbed this tower every dusk and told anyone who asked that I kept the light for a living king, on no proof but my own refusal to be told otherwise. I want you to understand, before you say anything else, that I did not do that for a memory of a boy I half-loved at 18. I did it because I could not accept being told what was true by a man who benefited from the telling. That's a different thing than love, or it was until about 4 nights ago when it started becoming difficult to keep the two apart." She turned to look at me directly. "You should have told me sooner. And I understand exactly why you didn't, which is the only reason I'm not more angry about it than I am." "I'm telling you now," I said, "with 6 of Vale's men on their way up this shingle to silence the one voice in this hold that never let a lie stand unquestioned. I don't have the luxury of a longer courtship, Alin, much as I'd have liked one. I need to know whether the man standing in front of you is someone you can stand beside in the next hour, because I intend to go down those stairs either way, and I would very much rather not go down them alone." She looked at me a moment longer, and then did something I had not expected and have treasured every day since. She laughed, short and startled, and entirely without malice, the laugh of a woman who has just watched 12 years of careful waiting resolve into something almost absurd in its suddenness. "You are, without question," she said, "the most complicated shipwrecked sailor I have ever pulled in off this coast. Yes, I can stand beside you. I've apparently been standing beside you, one way or another, for 12 years without knowing your face. I don't intend to stop now on a technicality." The tide pool in my chest, which had been drawn taut since the moment I first saw the lamp burning against the dark, went, at last, all the way loose, not the rope snapping, but the rope finally reaching what it had been straining toward across 300 miles in 12 years and 5 careful days. I have heard other men describe the moment a fated bond settles as a kind of surge, a howl, a fire catching all at once. For me it was the opposite, a long tension finally permitted to rest, the particular relief of a current that has found, after years of pulling against nothing, the shore it was always meant to reach. We did not have time for more than that. Below on the shingle, I could hear horses, and Corse's voice raised in the particular unhurried cruelty of a man who has been given permission to be unkind, and intends to use all of it. I went down the tower stairs first, Elin close behind me, though I had asked her once to stay above the lens. She had looked at me with an expression that made clear the asking had been a formality neither of us expected her to honor, and I had not asked twice. Corse stood at the base of the tower with 5 men behind him, and the look on his broad face when he saw me come out into the gray morning light without the borrowed coat, saw the old scar along my collarbone that half the hold had witnessed given to me in a boyhood hunt, the ring I had kept through every port sewn into a coat seam rather than sell it, worn now openly on my hand for the first time in 12 years. Was the look of a man watching the ground shift under an oath he had sworn to someone else. "This doesn't concern you, sailor," he started from old habit, before the words caught up with what his eyes were telling him, and he stopped. "It concerns me," I said, "because the lamp burns for the King of Brackenreach, and I intend to see it stays lit until he says otherwise. Which he is saying now, Corse, in case the matter wants clarifying. The King of Brackenreach is 12 years drowned," he said, though the certainty had gone out of his voice, replaced with something closer to a man doing arithmetic he did not want to finish. "Is he?" I said. "Tell your regent the sea gave back what it borrowed, and ask him whether he's prepared to explain to this hold, in front of its own people, why he has spent 12 years telling a fiction he had every reasonable cause to suspect might not hold." Corse's face did the thing I had crossed 300 miles of coast hoping, and dreading it would do. The particular arithmetic of a soldier realizing the ground under his loyalty has just shifted, weighing what he owed a false lord against what 12 years of quiet grievance in the hold had been waiting to hear, weighing, too, I think, an old half-forgotten liking for a boy he'd diced against before either of us had any notion of crowns or regencies. He did not lower his sword, but he did not raise it either, and behind him I saw 2 of the 5 men exchange a look that told me the arithmetic was not his alone to do. It was Elin's voice, not mine, that broke the stillness. Elin, standing on the tower stair with the great lamp's spare old flask held like a weapon and her chin at an angle I would come to know very well in the years after, addressing not me but the whole gathered shingle, because word runs fast on a coast that has spent 12 years waiting for a reason to stop grieving on schedule, and a crowd had already begun to gather at the edge of the beach, fishermen, net menders, an old woman I recognized, with a lurch as having once served in my father's hall. 12 years, Elin said. I have climbed these stairs every dusk and told anyone who asked that I kept this light for a living king, on no proof but my own refusal to be told otherwise. Some of you have called me stubborn for it. Some of you have called me worse. I would like very much, Corse, and all of you standing here who remember what an honest hold looks like, for you to lower that sword before we all find out together whether I was a fool for 12 years or the only one of us who never stopped asking the right question. Something in the crowd shifted, not all at once, not dramatically, but the way a tide shifts, a slow accumulating pressure finding its moment. The old woman from my father's hall stepped forward first, peering at my face with the particular unsparing scrutiny of someone who had known me as a boy and was not inclined to be fooled twice in one lifetime, and then said, to no one in particular but loud enough for the whole shingle to hear, "That's Aldrich's boy. That's the true shape of his father's jaw, salt or no salt on it." And once one voice had said it, others followed. the recognition spreading through the crowd the way recognition does when a whole community has been waiting, without quite admitting it to themselves, for permission to stop believing a comfortable lie. Kors lowered his sword first among the guard. The others followed, the way men follow when the true shape of a thing finally stands in front of them, and the false shape can no longer hold its own weight against it. Ossian Vale came down from the hall himself within the hour, half in his nightclothes and the whole of his borrowed authority already crumbling under him before he reached the shingle, and found not 6 armed men holding a stubborn keeper's tower, but half the hold gathered to watch a king they had been told to grieve stand very much alive beside the woman who had refused, for 12 years, to let them forget it. I will not make a long telling of what came after. The regent's fall is a matter for the hold's own records, not for this account, and it happened with less blood than 12 years of his rule perhaps deserved, which I count as mercy rather than weakness, and which Elin, when I told her so that evening, said was exactly the kind of mercy a king ought to practice, and a keeper had no obligation to extend on his behalf. Vale was permitted his ship and his exile rather than his life, on my order and against the wishes of more than a few of the fishermen who had suffered under him, because I had spent 12 years learning what it costs a hold to grieve for the wrong reasons, and I did not intend to give it fresh cause. What matters more, what I crossed 300 miles of coast and 12 years of believing myself unworthy to find, was standing on the tower stair with an oil flask in her hand, and no proof but her own refusal to be told otherwise. The weeks that followed were not simple, and I will not pretend they were. A hold does not write 12 years of misrule in a season, and there were quotas to unwind, families to make whole, a smithy to reopen, and a dozen smaller injustices to untangle one by one, each with its own aggrieved parties and its own slow mending. Kors stayed on, in the end, not out of any particular loyalty to me, but because Elin vouched for the particular quality of a man's second chances, having watched me take mine, and I found, in the months that followed, that she was right to trust her own judgment on the matter more often than I trusted mine. I did not make her my queen in front of the hold that same week, though the hold was ready for it within days, and would have cheered loudly enough to be heard 3 villages over. I climbed the tower stairs with her instead, that first evening as king again, and helped her fill the lamp, because it seemed to me that a woman who had kept a light burning alone for 12 years had earned the right to have it filled by 4 hands instead of 2 for the rest of her life, and because the pull in my chest had become, by then, something closer to peace than urgency, and peace deserved to be practiced slowly, the way we had practiced those first careful days before either of us knew the other's true name. "You could have told me," she said, that first evening, working the wick steady, not looking at me directly, that first night in the tower. "I could have," I agreed. I was afraid that if I said it aloud, I'd find out I'd spent 12 years becoming a man who no longer deserved the boy's promise. It seemed safer, for a night or two, to let you go on thinking I was only a sailor the sea had spat back. "And now," I said, "I think the promise was never the boy's to keep alone. I think you kept it for both of us, every dusk, whether either of us deserved it or not, and I don't intend to spend whatever years I have left finding out whether I've earned that. I intend to simply be grateful for it." She looked up then, and the lamp caught her face the way it had caught it that first night, salt-worn and steady and entirely unimpressed with kings, and something passed between us that had nothing to do with wolves or bonds or any of the old words for the thing that had been drawing us toward each other since a single unfinished night on this same shingle, 12 years and a lifetime ago. "Well," she said, "the light's lit. Mind you don't let it go out again." I have not. 12 years I let it burn without me, on nothing but her word against a false lord's convenient telling. I married her the following spring, in a ceremony she insisted be held not in the great hall but on the shingle below the tower, so that the light itself could stand witness, and I have spent every year since standing beside her to fill it, Not because a bond compelled me to, though it did and does still some nights, with the same quiet tide pull I first felt rounding that headland in the dark, but because a woman who keeps a promise for 12 years on no proof at all is the only kind of queen worth the crossing, and because I have learned in the years since that the truest thing a king can do for his hold is come home and tell the truth, even 12 years late, even when the truth costs him every comfortable lie he'd built his exile on. The lamp still burns every dusk. I have made certain of that myself, whatever else changes in Brackenreach in the years to come.